Hello, I'm Tim Smith with Gettysburg History, and welcome to an episode of Monuments Monday, where we're going to talk about the Henry Stewart Gettysburg View Monuments album. And of course, we're in the archives here at the Adams County Historical Society in Gettysburg. And, you know, oftentimes I talk about my interest in monuments and how I got interested in learning more about all the monuments on the battlefield. And my interest, of course, stems from photography. And I mentioned sometimes that when I was younger, I collected postcards of the battlefield and postcards of the monuments. And they were relatively cheap, and I could go around and line them up and learn about the monuments. Also, I collected stereo views of monuments on the battlefield. And I had a bunch of those when I was younger, and I bought in flea markets and stuff. But one day, I'm guessing this was in the 1980s, early 1980s, I was in an antique shop in Westminster, Maryland, where I graduated from Westminster High. But there was this guy, his name was Tom Gordon. He had this really nice antique shop. And in this antique shop, I found a collection of 130 glass plate negatives. Apparently, they were from a guy named Henry Stewart, who had died, and his stuff was sold at auction. And I knew right away the value of these negatives. They were monuments on the Gettysburg battlefield. And I knew a little bit about Civil War photography and 1880s photography. I really wanted them. I remember they were expensive. I had to get a loan from my brother Brian to buy them. Also, I had went through a local farmhouse near where I lived, and I collected lots of local, memorabilia from Carroll County. And this guy collected Carroll County stuff. So I was able to make a deal and able to get these glass plate negatives. And there are all kinds of really cool things in the negatives. They're dated. And the earliest negative that he took on the outside of the envelope that I have is like from November of 1886, and he numbered them, so we know he must have got a camera in late 1886, and he took photographs on the Gettysburg battlefield into late 1888. There's a few monuments in here that were dedicated in 1889, but it appears as if maybe those were erected earlier and dedicated later. But it's just a fabulous period. And there's all kinds of really cool photographs in there. At one point, after I started hanging out at the Gettysburg National Military Park Library, I offered them my negatives to let them make copies. And I noticed that they only made copies of ones that had fences in them, because this was in the period where they were in their memorial landscape phase, where they were trying to restore all the 1880s fences around the battlefield. And I find that rather humorous. Wayne Motts, his father, Warren Motts, is a professional photographer, and he actually took the glass plate negatives and made 8x10s for me early on of them. But they show all kinds of interesting battlefield views. And here's one that shows, the wooden cannon carriage that was on East Cemetery Hill for a while. And I'll put some of the views in the along with this. Henry Stewart, we have a view of him with his camera at Devil's Den. And it's interesting, you might know the backstory of Henry Stewart. His mother is Sallie Myers Stewart. And after the battle, she nursed wounded at her house at the Catholic Church on High Street, and then later at Camp Letterman General Hospital. And on July 6th, one of the soldiers she was caring for died in her arms. His name was Alexander McFarland Stewart. And she wrote to his family. They came to recover the body. they took the body back to Western Pennsylvania, but Sallie, through this guy's father, became acquainted with the soldier who died's brother. And his name was Henry Ferguson Stewart. They started corresponding. He came out to Gettysburg. They met. They fell in love. And eventually, they were married. And he became a pastor of a church out in Jamestown, Mercer County, Pennsylvania. And he died. And after he died, about a month later, Henry Stewart was born. Henry Alexander Stewart, his middle name, named after his uncle who was killed or mortally wounded in the first day of the battle. So, and then Sallie moved back to Gettysburg, lived to the rest of her life, raised her son, and her son eventually became a prominent doctor and became the president of the Adams County Historical Society. And when I started researching the owner of all my glass plate negatives, I came across the fact that some of his stuff was here at the Adams County Historical Society. And my first visit to the Historical Society in the old dorm of the Lutheran Seminary was to ask about the Henry Stewart collection. And what I learned is in 1945, in October of 1945, at one of the meetings, Henry Stewart donated a photographic album of monuments from the battlefield and views taken on the battlefield with this camera. And many of the views in here are the negatives that I purchased. Also, the other ones that I did not get were owned by the Adams County Historical Society. Also, he donated them about a year later. And I learned since then that before I bought these negatives, that William Frassinito had met Tom Gordon and bought some of the rarest negatives from him. So I donated my collection to the Historical Society. One day, Bill, of course, is going to donate his complete collection to the Historical Society, and Henry Stewart's photographs and negatives will all be back together in one place. One of the most interesting aspects about this collection is the fact that there are photographs in it that pertain to his uncle's death in the first day's battle, including photographs of a monument that was dedicated in 1886 or 1887 that marks the spot where Henry Stewart was wounded on Seminary Ridge. And that's since been replaced by another monument. I think we did a monument video on that. Another aspect that's fascinating about these photographs was not only did Henry Stewart get a camera in 1886, and again, if he's born in October of 1868. So he's 18 years old when he's taking these photographs. But in 1886, he also purchased a bicycle, which is in our collection. And the earliest negatives in this collection are taken around his house and taken of his bicycle. And that bicycle, of course, is on display in our museum. And in several of the images in this collection of monuments on the battlefield, you can see the bicycle in the background of the view. So I can only imagine in 1886, 1887, 1888, Henry Stewart riding around the battlefield on this huge bicycle that, some people refer to these things as boneshakers, and carrying this camera in a box on his back with a tripod. It's just amazing to think about this collection and how it all came together. And one other thing about the collection of photographs was taken during a time period when many Pennsylvania regiments established monuments on the battlefield, but prior to the movement of the monuments to another location. Remember that In 1888, a lot of the Pennsylvania regiments were given money by the state legislature to put up new monuments. And in 1889, when they dedicated those monuments, they moved the original monuments and put another one in the spot where it was located. So early on, by gaining access to this collection, I came upon the realization that monuments had been moved around the battlefield. And of course, that's one of the topics I'm really interested in. Another thing, I remember when Wayne Motch was working on this Armistead book, there had been some question about whether the Armistead monument had been moved from its original location. And sure enough, we have a glass plate negative of it. I was able to take the glass plate negative onto the field, stand where the camera is, and look at the monument through the glass plate negative, and of course realize that it had not been moved. And I think Wayne was appreciative. For some reason, he was obsessed with the marker to on East Cemetery Hill to Cooper's Battery, the original monument, and he took photographs of all the angles of that monument. And those views were helpful when the Park Service was trying to read the inscription that had been blurred out on the monument over the years, and I was able to help them with that. A good example of the usefulness of these photographs is the original monument to Cooper's Battery on East Cemetery Hill. It was made out of some kind of marble that deteriorated over the years, and on each side of it there was text. And the park, although they had photographs of one side of it and some drawings that talked about, some engravings, they didn't have views of each side of it. And sure enough, Henry Stewart recorded views all around the monument that helped them when they were restoring it. Also, in the album, there are great views of the town, like a view of the railroad station, the Gettysburg and Harrisburg Railroad Station and Depot in 1888, the Eagle Hotel. There's great photograph looking up Middle Street. And also, Henry Stewart later was able to provide photographs for the history of Company D, 149th Pennsylvania Volunteers, a unit that his uncle, as it turns out, Alexander Stewart, was a part of when he was killed on the first day of the battle or mortally wounded. And this book in our collection is actually a gift to Henry Stewart's son from grandmother S., Sallie Myers Stewart. And in it, there's a photograph of the 149th Pennsylvania's monument on the first day's battlefield, and written below the photograph is the identity of the two children standing in it, which are Henry Stewart's sons. Remember, if you like all the content we put on our YouTube channel, please like and subscribe and share this with your friends.